In the 19th century, the great pathologist Virchow recognized the importance of cell death in pathology. He mostly described necrotic cell death that happens as a consequence of injury. But later in the 19th century, it was the neurobiologist Ramon Cajon who described a form of cell death that he was observing in neurons, which, based on his illustrations, we now understand was in fact apoptotic cell death, apoptosis. It wasn't until much later, though, really the 1960s, that the importance of cell death in development was recognized. People like Saunders described cell death and development in the development of the vertebrate limb, for example, in the development of the eye and of the brain. And it was shortly after that that Richard Lockshin coined the term programmed cell death to indicate a form of cell death that's actually programmed in development. Now, many people use programmed cell death and apoptosis as synonyms, but they really aren't. Programmed cell death is developmental cell death, and it usually precedes by apoptosis, but not always. Metamorphosis in insects is a form of programmed cell death, and only some of that cell death is apoptotic. Much of it is not. In the early 1970s, that John Kerr described through his studies in pathological samples a form of cell death which he called shrinkage necrosis, to make it distinct from necrotic cell death. 1 year later, he, Andrew Wiley, and Curry published a paper where they coined the term apoptosis. This was in 1972. For several years after that, especially Andrew Wiley described features of apoptotic cell death. And in 1980, he provided the first real biochemical signature of apoptosis, and that was the fragmentation of DNA. There was now a way to definitively go in and say a cell had died by apoptosis by performing a biochemical assay.